The day the HOA called 911 and ordered my lakeside farms. Power cut was the same. Day their smart home empire started strangling itself. Patricia Levington, face caked in Botox like a porcelain. Mask, clutching her tablet like a digital scepter. Screaming violation of community energy standards. They thought I was just some backwoods farmer. They had no idea that the transformer powering their $80 million smart home sat squarely on my land. And I owned something that with just a simple twist could leave the entire development stone cold. 10 minutes later, sirens wailed. Lights flickered chaotically. Automatic doors locked shut. Refrigerators died. The whole neighborhood descended into chaos. I stood there silent, watching each house sink into darkness. You're watching Loop Stories, aren't you? Comment below if you've ever wanted to see an HOA electrocute itself, because welcome to the best part. But let me back up 3 days when this whole circus began. My name is Caleb Strickland, and I'm the 4th generation to work. This 15-acre plot beside Crystal Lake. The land's been in my family since 1896, long before anyone dreamed of building computers-controlled mansions around a working farm. 3 years ago, my wife Sarah lost her battle with cancer, and I came home from my engineering job at Tesla to take care of what she always called our little piece of forever. The wedding ring on my finger felt heavier each morning, but I kept it on because this place, these chickens, this simple life felt like the last connection I had to her. The smart homes of Emerald Heights had sprouted around me like digital mushrooms over the past 5 years. 80 houses, each worth between 2 and 4 million, filled with families who believed money could buy them anything, including authority over land that didn't belong to them. Their HOA president, Patricia Levington, was a former tech executive who'd retired early at 45 with enough money to buy the biggest house in the development. Her sister Melissa, 3 years younger and perpetually seeking Patricia's approval, had moved in next door and spent her days creating TikTok videos about luxury lakeside living. Both women treated the Homeowners Association like their personal kingdom, and apparently, they decided my farm was their next conquest. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when I found an official-looking envelope taped to my mailbox. Inside was a notice of violation printed on expensive letterhead that made it look like a government document. The notice claimed my chicken coop created excessive noise, odorous emissions, and aesthetic violations incompatible with community standards. It demanded I remove the structure within 72 hours or face fines of $500 per day. What caught my attention was the footer. This notice applies to all properties within the Crystal Lake Community Management Zone as established by the Emerald Heights Homeowners Association. They were claiming jurisdiction over my land. I sat on my porch that evening, stroking my wedding ring and thinking about what Sarah would have said. She'd always been the fighter in our relationship, the one who read every contract twice and never backed down from bullies. "Trust your instincts, Cal," she used to say. And when someone tries to push you around, push back with facts. So I did what any good engineer would do. I went to the county records office and pulled every document related to my property, going back to the original homestead grant. What I found was fascinating. My land had been legally registered 127 years before the HOA even existed. More importantly, when the electric company ran power lines to the new development in 1987, they signed a 43-year easement agreement with my father to place their transformer on our property. The contract was still valid until 2030 with automatic renewal clauses that required the landowner's consent. The HOA had built its entire electrical infrastructure on land it didn't own and couldn't control. Armed with this information, I decided to visit Patricia Levington. I drove my battered Ford pickup to her house, a gleaming monument to modern technology with solar panels, smart glass windows, and enough automation to run a small spacecraft. Patricia answered the door wearing yoga pants that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Her face stretched tight from cosmetic procedures, tablet clutched in her manicured hands like a shield. "Mr. Strickland," she said, looking at me like I'd tracked mud across her marble floors. "I assume you're here to discuss compliance with the violation notice?" Behind her, Melissa appeared with her phone already recording, no doubt planning to document my submission for her social media followers. "I'm here to discuss jurisdiction," I said, pulling out the folder of documents I'd prepared. "According to county records, your HOA has no legal authority over my property. This land was registered in 1896, and your development was built around it. Patricia's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Mr. Strickland, you can wave those old papers around all you want, but this is the 21st century. We have AI security systems. We have influence. We have resources. You're just a farmer with chickens and outdated ideas about property rights. She gestured toward her smart home's control panel, which was monitoring everything from soil, moisture in her garden to the ambient, temperature in each room. This is the future. Your little farm is the past. I stood up slowly, meeting her gaze with the kind of calm that comes from knowing, something other people don't. Patricia, can I ask you something? What do you know about power? She frowned, clearly confused by the question. Real power? I mean, not the kind you buy with money or intimidate people with. The kind that flows through cables and makes all your smart gadgets work. What are you talking about? She snapped. But I could see the first flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I'm talking about the fact that everything in this development, every smart lock, every automated system, every device, that makes you feel so powerful depends on electricity. And that electricity flows through a transformer that sits on my land, under a contract that gives me complete control over its operation. I smiled, the same quiet smile Sarah used, to give me when she knew she was right. I'm going to give you a practical lesson about where real power comes from. The next morning, I woke to find another envelope taped to my door. This one bearing the official seal of Emerald, Heights HOA, and marked final warning in bold, red letters. Patricia had escalated quickly, which told me she was either very confident or very scared. The letter threatened to involve appropriate regulatory authorities if I didn't comply within 24 hours. And it mentioned something about environmental compliance inspections that made my engineers' brain start connecting dots I didn't like. I spent the morning walking my property lines with a surveyor's eye, documenting everything with my phone camera. What I found was more interesting than I'd expected. The electrical infrastructure serving Emerald Heights wasn't just on my land. It was completely dependent on it. The main transformer, the switching station, and even the backup generators for the community's smart grid system were all positioned on easements that ran across my 15 acres. Without my property, the entire development would need to rebuild its power system from scratch, a project that would cost millions and take years to complete. That's when Marcus Chen called. Marcus had been my father's friend for 30 years, working his way up from apprentice electrician to chief engineer for Lakeshore Power Company. Cal, I heard through the grapevine that you're having some trouble with your new neighbors, he said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone who knew more than he was saying. Thought you might want to know that we've got scheduled maintenance on your transformer next week. As the landowner, you'll need to sign off on access. Marcus, tell me something. That easement contract from 1987, it's still valid, right? I could hear him shuffling papers on the other end of the line. Valid until 2030 with automatic renewal if you agree to it. Why do you ask? I explained about the HOA's claims, and Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Cal, that contract gives you veto power over any electrical work on your property. If you wanted to, you could delay maintenance indefinitely or even terminate the agreement entirely. The whole development would go dark. While I was absorbing this information, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Strickland, this is Ruby Martinez, secretary for the HOA board. We need to talk. Coffee shop on Main Street, 2 p.m., come alone. The message felt like something from a spy movie, but I was curious enough to show up. Ruby turned out to be a single mother in her late 30s with tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of person who read the fine print and kept detailed records. She slid a manila folder across the table to me, glancing nervously toward the door. I've been the HOA secretary for 3 years, and I've watched Patricia Levington turn this community into her dictatorship. What she's doing to you is just the latest example. The folder contained email printouts, financial records, and meeting minutes that painted a disturbing picture. Patricia had been systematically targeting residents who didn't conform to her vision of community standards, using legal threats and financial pressure to force compliance or drive them out. More troubling was her plan to sue me for environmental violations, based on a report she intended to commission from what she called a qualified environmental consultant. There's something else, Ruby said, lowering her voice. She's been nervous about some construction issues near the lake. Keeps asking me to delete old emails about concrete runoff and soil testing. I think she's worried about covering up some corners they cut during development. The pieces were starting to form a pattern, and I didn't like where it was heading. I thanked Ruby and drove home to find a certified letter waiting in my mailbox. Inside was my response to Patricia's ultimatum. Carefully worded and polite as Sunday dinner, I informed the HOA that any interference with legitimate agricultural operations on my private property would require a review of all easement agreements, including the electrical infrastructure contract that made their smart homes possible. I suggested they might want to consult with their attorneys before taking any further action. The reaction was swift and predictable. 2 hours later, Melissa posted a TikTok video from outside my property line. Her phone held at that annoying angle young people use for social media. "So our farmer neighbor is threatening our power supply," she announced to her followers, gesturing dramatically toward my chicken coop. Like, who does that? Can you imagine living next to someone who tries to control your electricity just because you ask them to be a good neighbor? The video racked up 3,000 views in the first hour with comments, split between people supporting me and others, calling for HOA solidarity. What Melissa didn't realize was that her viral attempt was backfiring. Residents who dealt with HOA overreach in their community started sharing the video with comments like, "Good for him." And about time someone stood up to these people. The hashtag #FarmerVSOA began trending in our county's social media groups, and not in the way she'd intended. That evening, I was feeding my chickens when I saw Patricia pacing in her backyard. Phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly with her free hand. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her body language. She was calling in reinforcements, which meant the real battle was about to begin. I finished my chores and headed inside, but not before noticing that several of my neighbors had started watching the drama unfold from their windows. Word was spreading and people were choosing sides. As I settled into my recliner with a cup of coffee, my phone rang. Patricia's voice was ice-cold and carefully controlled. "Mr. Strickland, I hope you're proud of yourself for creating this unnecessary drama. But I want you to know that we're not backing down. We have resources you can't imagine, and we're prepared to use them. Tomorrow you're going to learn what happens when you threaten a community that knows how to protect itself." Patricia wasted no time making good on her threat. At exactly 8:30 the next morning, a white van pulled into my driveway with Environmental Solutions, LLC, painted on the side in official-looking green letters. Out stepped a man in his 40s, wearing a khaki field vest covered in patches and carrying a clipboard thick with form. Behind him came a younger woman with a professional camera, clearly there to document whatever violations they planned to discover. "Mr. Strickland, I'm Dr. Jake Morrison from Environmental Solutions," the man announced, flashing a badge that looked authentic from a distance. "We've received reports of potential environmental hazards on this property, and I'm here to conduct a mandatory inspection under the Clean Water Protection Act." His voice carried the bureaucratic authority that most people find intimidating. But my engineering background had taught me to look closer at details that didn't add up. The first red flag was his equipment. The soil contamination detector he pulled from his van was a moisture meter I recognized from Home Depot, and his water quality testing kit consisted of pH strips you could buy at any pool supply store. The second red flag was his badge, which had no serial number and looked like it had been printed on a home computer. But instead of calling him out immediately, I decided to let the performance continue while I gathered evidence of my own. "Of course, Dr. Morrison. I'm happy to cooperate with any legitimate environmental assessment," I said, pulling out my phone and opening the video recording app. "I hope you don't mind if I document the inspection for my records for insurance purposes. You understand?" Jake's eyes flicked nervously toward the camera, but he couldn't object without raising suspicions. For the next hour, I watched Jake perform an elaborate charade of environmental testing. He took soil samples that he immediately sealed in unmarked containers, measured toxic gas emissions from my chicken coop using a device that was just a digital thermometer, and documented water contamination indicators in my using equipment that wasn't even designed for water testing. His photographer captured every moment, creating what would supposedly be evidence of environmental violations that didn't exist. From across the field, I could see Patricia and Melissa standing by their fence line. Patricia holding binoculars and Melissa, live streaming the inspection for her TikTok followers. Guys, this is happening right now, Melissa announced to her phone. The environmental people are finally here to deal with our problem neighbor. This is so crazy that it's happening live. What she didn't realize was that her live stream was providing real-time documentation of their conspiracy. Halfway through the inspection, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chin. Power company scheduled. Maintenance tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Need landowner. Access approval for transformer work. Standard procedure, but your call. I glanced at the timestamp and realized Patricia's timing wasn't coincidental. She was trying to resolve the environmental crisis before I could exercise any leverage over the electrical system. Jake was wrapping up his performance, sealing evidence, bags with theatrical precision when I decided to test his credentials. Dr. Morrison, before you finish up, could you sign this acknowledgement form for my insurance company? They require verification of inspector qualifications for any environmental assessments. I handed him a blank piece of paper with inspector. Credential verification written at the top. His reaction told me everything I needed to know. I don't typically sign documents outside of my official reporting process, he stammered, suddenly very interested in packing his fake equipment. My findings will be included in the formal reports, submitted to the appropriate agencies. When I pressed him for his inspector license number, he claimed it was confidential information and hurried toward his van. But Melissa, caught up in the excitement of her live stream, made a crucial mistake. She'd left her phone's microphone on while having a private conversation with Patricia, and her 500 live viewers heard everything. Do you think Jake's acting was convincing enough? Melissa asked her sister. I mean, $3,000 is a lot to pay someone, but if it gets results, the comment section exploded immediately, with viewers questioning whether they just witnessed a staged inspection. Within 2 hours of Jake's departure, I had uploaded my video to the local Facebook community group. The footage clearly showed Jake using inappropriate equipment, avoiding credential verification, and displaying nervous behavior when questioned about his authority. I included screenshots from Melissa's live stream, where she'd accidentally revealed paying for the inspection. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive, with over 300 comments condemning the HOA's tactics. Local newspaper reporter Jennifer Walsh reached out that evening. Having seen the viral video evidence, Mr. Strickland, I've been covering HOA disputes for 15 years, and I've never seen documentation this clear of fraudulent environmental reporting. Would you be willing to go on record about what happened today? I agreed to an interview knowing that media attention would force Patricia to either back down or double down on her deception. The story ran online that night with the headline, Fake Environmental Inspector Exposed an HOA Property Dispute. Within hours, it had been shared across multiple social media platforms and picked up by regional news outlets. The comment section was filled with stories from other residents who dealt with similar HOA intimidation tactics, creating a groundswell of public opinion against Patricia's methods. But Patricia Levington was not the type of person who accepted defeat gracefully. At 11:15 that night, my phone rang with a call from the county sheriff's department. Mr. Strickland, this is dispatch. We've received a complaint about harassment and potential environmental terrorism at your address. Deputy Bradley will be out tomorrow morning to investigate the allegations. I set the phone down and looked out my kitchen window toward the Levington house, where I could see Patricia silhouetted against her smart home's automated lighting system, still pacing and making phone calls. She'd escalated from fake inspectors to involving law enforcement, which meant she was either completely confident in her next move or completely desperate. Either way, tomorrow was going to be interesting, and I had a feeling that Patricia's definition of environmental terrorism was about to collide with the reality of actual legal authority. Deputy Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived at my farm at 9 sharp the next morning, driving the kind of patrol car that makes innocent people nervous and guilty. People sweat. I'd known Tom for most of my adult life. He'd grown up 3 counties over and understood the difference between rural property rights and suburban power plays. As he stepped out of his cruiser, I could see Patricia and Melissa hurrying across the field from their house, clearly expecting to witness my arrest for whatever crimes they'd reported. "Morning, Cal," Tom said, touching the brim of his hat in the casual way of men who'd shared more than a few beers over the years. "Got a call about environmental terrorism and intimidation tactics. Patricia Levington claims you're threatening the safety of her community with some kind of power grid manipulation. His tone suggested he was already skeptical, but he had to follow procedure regardless of personal opinions. Patricia arrived breathless and overdressed for a farm visit, wearing white pants and designer shoes that were completely inappropriate for walking across a field. "Officer Bradley, thank goodness you're here," she panted, clutching her tablet like it contained evidence of war crimes. "This man has been systematically threatening our entire community. Yesterday, he interfered with a legitimate environmental inspection, and now he's making threats about our electrical supply." "Ma'am, it's Deputy Bradley, and I'll need to hear both sides before drawing any conclusions," Tom replied with professional courtesy that barely concealed his irritation. "Mr. Strickland, would you mind explaining your version of recent events?" I handed him the folder of documentation I'd prepared, including the county property records, the electrical easement contract, and screenshots from Melissa's live stream confession about paying the fake inspector. As Tom reviewed the documents, his expression shifted from neutral to concerned to barely suppressed anger. "Miss Levington, are you aware that hiring someone to impersonate a government environmental inspector is a federal crime and that filing false police reports is a misdemeanor in this county?" Patricia's face flushed, but she maintained her defiant stance. "I have no idea what you're talking about. We hired a legitimate environmental consultant to assess potential hazards." That's when Melissa made her second crucial mistake. Unable to handle the tension and desperate to defend her sister, she blurted out, "We only hired Jake to document the violations because nobody else would listen to our complaints. It's not like we told him to lie about anything specific." She trailed off as she realized what she just admitted, but the damage was done. Tom looked at Melissa with the expression of a man who'd heard too many weak excuses in his 20-year career. "So, you're confirming that you hired someone to conduct what you believed was an official environmental inspection, knowing he wasn't a legitimate government inspector?" Melissa opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water, looking desperately at Patricia for rescue that wasn't coming. Before Patricia could formulate a response, another vehicle pulled into my driveway. Ruby Martinez stepped out of a Honda Civic, carrying a banker's box that looked heavy enough to contain serious evidence. "Deputy Bradley, I'm glad you're here," she called out, approaching our group with the determined stride of someone who'd finally decided to do the right thing. "I have some documents that might be relevant to your investigation." Ruby set the box down and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "For 3 years, I've been keeping detailed records of HOA financial transactions as required by state law. Patricia has spent $31,000 from our emergency fund on what she calls legal and consulting expenses, including $3,000 for yesterday's fake environmental inspection. She's also used HOA money to hire a private attorney for personal legal matters that have nothing to do with community business." Patricia's carefully controlled facade finally cracked. "Ruby, you're fired!" Effective immediately. "You have no authority to share confidential HOA documents with outsiders." But Ruby remained calm, meeting Patricia's glare with steady confidence. "Patricia, I photocopied everything and sent certified copies to the state HOA Oversight Board 3 days ago. They've scheduled an emergency audit for next week, and they specifically want to review your unauthorized expenditures." Tom was taking notes now, his earlier skepticism replaced by the focused attention of a law enforcement officer, documenting potential crimes. "Miss Levington, I'm going to need you to come to the station for questioning about these financial irregularities and the fake inspector incident. Filing false police reports is serious enough, but if you've been misusing community funds for personal vendettas, that's embezzlement." The color drained from Patricia's face as the reality of her situation hit her. She'd expected to use the police to intimidate me into submission, but instead found herself facing criminal charges. "This is ridiculous. I'm a respected member of this community. I have connections. You can't seriously believe the word of a disgruntled employee and a troublemaking farmer over mine." Deputy Bradley was closing his notebook when his radio crackled to life. "Unit 23, we have a code 10 to 54 at Emerald Heights. Possible electrical emergency affecting multiple residences. Residents report being trapped in their homes due to smart lock malfunctions and security system failures." Tom looked at his watch and then at me with a knowing expression. Cal, that wouldn't have anything to do with that scheduled maintenance Marcus mentioned, would it? I glanced at my watch, noting it was exactly 2:30 in the afternoon. Just routine transformer maintenance. Tom. Marcus needed landowner approval for access, and I signed off on it this morning. Should only take a few hours to complete. What I didn't mention was that I'd specifically requested the maintenance be performed during peak smart home operation hours when the power fluctuations would have maximum impact on automated systems. Patricia stared at me with dawning comprehension, finally understanding that I wasn't just some farmer she could push around. "You did this on purpose," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of rage and fear. "You're sabotaging our homes." But Tom shook his head, consulting the documents in my file. "Ma'am, Mr. Strickland has every legal right to schedule maintenance on electrical equipment located on his property. If your homes can't handle routine power company procedures, that sounds like a design flaw, not sabotage." As if summoned by our conversation, cars began streaming down the development's main road as residents returned from work to find their smart homes transformed into expensive locked boxes. The electronic gates at the community entrance were stuck in the closed position, forcing people to park outside and walk to their powerless houses. Patricia's expression shifted from anger to panic as she realized her neighbors would be looking for someone to blame, and she was the obvious target. Deputy Bradley gathered his papers and prepared to leave, but not before delivering a final warning. "Miss Levington, I expect you at the station tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to discuss these charges, and I'd strongly suggest you consult with a real attorney, not whoever you've been getting legal advice from." As his patrol car disappeared down the road, Patricia stood frozen in my driveway, her tablet dead in her hands, watching her smart home empire crumble in real time. By 4 that afternoon, Emerald Heights looked like a scene from a disaster movie. 62 of the 80 smart homes had lost power completely, turning their state-of-the-art automation systems into expensive paperweights. Residents stood in their driveways holding dead phones, unable to unlock their front doors because the biometric scanners had failed. Garage doors remained sealed shut, trapping luxury cars inside like museum exhibits. The community's electronic gates hung open at awkward angles, their motors burned out from trying to cycle without proper power regulation. I watched the chaos unfold from my porch, sipping coffee from a mug that Sarah had painted with sunflowers. During one of her good days, my simple farmhouse, with its backup generator humming quietly in the barn, was the only building in the area with consistent electricity. The irony wasn't lost on me that the most technologically advanced neighborhood in the county had been crippled by a routine maintenance procedure that my 100-year-old property handled without breaking stride. "Marcus." Chen called around 5 to check on the situation. "Cal, I've got 47 service. Calls from your neighbors and my phone hasn't stopped ringing. These smart homes weren't designed to handle the kind of power fluctuations that come with transformer maintenance. Their systems are so sensitive that even minor voltage variations cause complete shutdowns." I could hear the stress in his voice, but also a hint of professional satisfaction. "The thing is, this is exactly the kind of scheduled maintenance that's covered in our easement contract. If anyone complains, you can point them to Section 4.2, which specifically allows for service interruptions during equipment upgrades." That's when the procession began. Cars lined up outside my property like pilgrims, seeking salvation as residents realized that the farmer they dismissed as irrelevant held the key to their electronic lives. The first to approach was Dr. Amanda Chen, Marcus's wife, and a pediatric surgeon who lived in one of the larger homes near the lake. She walked across my field in her scrubs, having been unable to change clothes because her smart closet system was offline. "Mr. Strickland, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Marcus's wife," she said, extending a hand that still smelled faintly of hospital soap. I wanted to apologize for not speaking up sooner about what Patricia's been doing. A lot of us knew her tactics were wrong, but we were afraid of becoming targets ourselves. Her honesty was refreshing after days of dealing with Patricia's manipulations. Over the next hour, more residents made the trek to my farmhouse, each carrying their own story of HOA overreach. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, a retired teacher, had been fined $200 for hanging laundry Outside, because it compromised the aesthetic integrity of the community. The Morrison family faced daily citations because their twin, 8-year-olds, toys were visible in their backyard, violating the clean sightline policy that Patricia had instituted. Young couple James and Sarah Kim couldn't plant a vegetable garden because food cultivation was deemed inappropriate for residential zoning, even though I'd been farming the same crops 50 yards away for decades. The stories kept coming. Mike Rodriguez, a veteran and single father, had been threatened with legal action for displaying an American flag that was supposedly too large for community standards. Lisa Thompson, a nurse who worked night shifts, received noise violation citations for her lawnmower because Patricia deemed 7 a.m. too early for disruptive activities, even though the HOA bylaws allowed lawn maintenance after 6. Each resident brought documentation of fines, warnings, and harassment that painted a picture of systematic abuse that went far beyond my property dispute. By 6:00, I had 73 people gathered in my barn, the only building large enough to accommodate the crowd. The contrast was stark. Neighbors who owned homes worth millions, sitting on hay bales underexposed, wooden beams lit by LED bulbs, powered by my diesel generator. It felt like a town hall meeting from a different century, where community problems were solved through discussion rather than litigation. I want everyone to understand the situation clearly. I began standing near my workbench where I kept my electrical tools. Patricia Levington has been using your HOA fees to wage a personal war against my property rights. She spent over $30,000 of your money on fake inspectors, frivolous legal threats, and harassment campaigns. Meanwhile, she's been demanding that I remove the agricultural operation that supports the electrical infrastructure your homes depend on. Ruby Martinez stood up from her seat, near the door, still carrying the banker's box that had exposed Patricia's financial crimes. I've been keeping track of every expenditure for 3 years. Patricia has violated state HOA management laws, misappropriated community funds, and made decisions without board approval. As of tomorrow, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence and demanding her immediate removal from office. The crowd erupted in support of applause, but silence. Before you make any leadership decisions, you need to understand your options regarding the electrical situation. I'm prepared to offer 3 choices. I pulled out a folder containing the contracts Marcus had helped me review. First, the HOA can issue a formal apology and pay $75,000 in compensation for the harassment and false accusations I've endured. Second, you can sign a new electrical easement contract that pays me $8,000 monthly for hosting your power infrastructure on my land. Third, you can arrange for alternative electrical service, which would require building a new power grid at an estimated cost of $2.3 million. The barn fell silent as residents absorbed the implications. They'd built their smart homes on the assumption that my land would always be available for their infrastructure needs, never considering that property rights might interfere with their technological convenience. Dr. Chen raised her hand and asked the question everyone was thinking. Mr. Strickland, what would you prefer? Which option serves your interests best? I looked around the barn at faces that ranged from worried to embarrassed to angry, but mostly just tired of being manipulated by someone who didn't represent their values. Honestly, I'd prefer to be left alone to farm my land and honor my wife's memory in peace. But if Patricia had succeeded in driving me out, you'd all be dealing with a corporate development company that would charge you 10 times what I'm asking and show you none of the patience I've demonstrated. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Patricia's voice rang out from outside the barn. What the hell is going on here? This is private property and you're all trespassing. She stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by the flashing lights of what appeared to be official vehicles. Behind her, I could see Melissa frantically recording with her phone, no doubt, planning to live stream this confrontation for her followers. But Patricia's dramatic entrance was interrupted by a new voice, calm and authoritative. Miss Levington, we need to speak with you immediately. I'm Ryan Carter, currently living in San Diego, California, and I write scripts for the Loop Stories channel. This story still has many shortcomings, and I really hope you viewers will give feedback in the comments section below. A woman in a business suit stepped into view, flanked by 2 men who carried themselves like federal agents. I'm Director Hamilton from the HOA Regional Oversight Board, and these gentlemen are from the FBI. We have some questions about your financial management and your involvement with fraudulent environmental reporting. Patricia's face went white as she realized that her attempt to intimidate the community meeting had backfired spectacularly. What happened next unfolded like a live-action disaster for Patricia. Broadcast in real time to Melissa's 5,000 tick talk viewers who were expecting to see residents getting evicted from my property. Instead, they witnessed something far more dramatic. Director Hamilton stepped forward with official documents, her voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt with corrupt HOA officials before. Miss Levington, based on financial records provided by your secretary and corroborated by banking institutions, you're being investigated for embezzlement of community funds totaling $31,000. Patricia tried to maintain her composure, but her hands were shaking as she clutched her dead tablet. I don't know what you're talking about. Every expenditure I made was approved by the board and necessary for community protection. But Director Hamilton was reading from a thick file that suggested otherwise. According to our investigation, you authorized payments to Environmental Solutions, LLC, a company that doesn't exist in any state registry. You also hired private legal counsel using emergency funds without board approval. And you've been charging personal expenses to HOA accounts for 8 months. The 73 residents in my barn had gone completely silent, watching this confrontation unfold like a courtroom drama. Many of them were recording with their phones, creating multiple angles of Patricia's public meltdown. Melissa's live stream comments were exploding with viewers, asking if this was real or scripted, unable to believe they were witnessing such spectacular justice in real time. That's when Patricia made her fatal mistake. Instead of asking for a lawyer or remaining silent, she decided to double down on her authority. You people have no idea what you're dealing with, she announced, her voice rising to a near shriek. I have connections in the state government. I influence with the County Planning Commission. I've donated thousands to local political campaigns. This farmer, she pointed, directly at me is a nobody who threatens everything we've built here. But her rant was interrupted by one of the FBI agents, who stepped forward with his own set of documents. Ma'am, we're also investigating reports of environmental fraud related to concrete disposal in protected watershed areas. Specifically, we have evidence that construction debris from this development was illegally dumped into Crystal Lake during the building phase, and that you were directly involved in covering up these violations. The color drained completely from Patricia's face as she realized the scope of the investigation. Ruby Martinez had done more than expose a financial irregularities. She'd provided evidence of environmental crimes that carried federal penalties. I want a lawyer, Patricia whispered, but her voice was barely audible over the murmur of shocked residents. Melissa, still live streaming and completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation, made everything worse by blurting out, Cairo Chung Taung panic, and Jake said nobody would ever find out about the concrete thing because it happened 3 years ago. The FBI agents immediately turned their attention to Melissa, while the live stream comments exploded with viewers screaming, "She just confessed," on live television. Director Hamilton took control of the scene with professional efficiency. Miss Levington, you're being formally removed from your position as HOA president effective immediately. The board will be dissolved, pending a complete audit of all financial transactions and operational decisions made under your leadership. Miss Martinez will serve as interim administrator until new elections can be held. She turned to address the residents gathered in my barn. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you've had to endure this level of mismanagement. The state takes HOA oversight very seriously, and this situation will be resolved according to the law. But the drama wasn't over yet. As Patricia was being escorted toward the FBI vehicles, a commotion erupted from the parking area outside my barn. Melissa had tried to escape in her Tesla, M01 but the car's battery was completely dead because her smart garage charging system had been offline all day. She was stranded in the driver's seat, frantically calling for an Uber while FBI agents approached her vehicle. The absurdity of the moment was not lost on her. 5,000 live viewers who began flooding the comments with laughing emojis and jokes about smart homes, stupid choices. The live stream captured everything. Melissa's panicked face as she realized she couldn't escape. Patricia being read her rights, beside expensive cars that wouldn't start, and the contrast between my simple farmhouse, with its steady generator hum and the powerless, smart home scattered across the darkening landscape. Within minutes, clips from the stream were being shared across social media platforms with hashtags like Number Home Meltdown and Number Smart Home failed trending nationally. As the FBI vehicles disappeared down the road with Patricia in custody, the residents in my barn sat in stunned silence. What had started as a community meeting to address power outages had become a federal criminal investigation broadcast live to thousands of viewers. Dr. Chen was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Strickland, we owe you an enormous apology. If you hadn't stood up to her, we might never have discovered how deep this corruption went." Ruby Martinez stepped forward with her banker's box. "Now evidence in a federal case. I've been documenting Patricia's violations for 3 years, waiting for someone with enough courage to challenge her. You allowed me to do what was right." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The farmer they dismissed as powerless had exposed a criminal conspiracy that reached from local HOA politics to federal environmental law. But as the crowd began to disperse, one of the FBI agents returned with a business card and a troubling question. "Mr. Strickland, we're going to need to examine soil and water samples from your property as part of the environmental investigation. How long have you been aware of potential contamination issues?" "In Crystal Lake?" The FBI's environmental investigation took 6 months to complete, but the results were more damaging to Patricia's legacy than anyone had anticipated. The soil and water samples from Crystal Lake revealed systematic contamination from construction runoff that had been deliberately concealed during the development's building phase. Patricia hadn't just embezzled HOA funds and hired fake inspectors. She'd overseen the illegal disposal of thousands of tons of concrete debris and chemical waste directly into a protected watershed that supplied drinking water to 3 counties. The federal charges came down like dominoes in early spring. Patricia Levington received 18 months in federal prison for embezzlement, environmental crimes, and conspiracy to defraud government agencies. The financial penalties were even more severe: a $50,000 fine, full restitution of the stolen HOA funds, and personal liability for the $2.3 million environmental cleanup that would take 5 years to complete. Her smart home empire, built on borrowed money and fraudulent environmental reports, crumbled faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Melissa's fate was almost more pathetic than her sister's. Her live stream confession had provided crucial evidence for the federal prosecution, making her an unwitting star witness against Patricia. The viral videos of her failed Tesla escape and her panicked admissions had turned her into a cautionary tale about social media oversharing. She'd lost her sponsorship deals, her follower count had plummeted to triple digits, and she was facing her legal troubles for knowingly participating in the fake inspector scheme. 6 months after the investigation concluded, she moved back to Phoenix to live with their mother, working at a coffee shop and staying off social media entirely. Ruby Martinez, meanwhile, had been unanimously elected as the new HOA president, running on a platform of transparency and common-sense governance. Her first official act was to sign a legitimate electrical easement agreement with me, paying $5,000 monthly for the transformer rights and including a formal written apology for the harassment I'd endured. The new contract also established me as an independent power consultant for the community, combining my engineering background with my practical farming experience to help residents reduce their dependence on the fragile smart home systems that had failed them so spectacularly. The transformation of Emerald Heights over the following year was remarkable. Without Patricia's iron-fisted aesthetic rules, the community began to resemble an actual neighborhood, rather than a sterile showroom. Mrs. Vasquez hung her laundry outside without fear of citation. The Morrison children's toys appeared in backyards where they belong. Mike Rodriguez flew his American flag with pride, and Lisa Thompson mowed her lawn whenever her schedule allowed. The Kim family planted the vegetable garden they'd always wanted, and I supplied them with heritage seeds and organic farming advice that turned their backyard into a model of sustainable agriculture. My own life had changed in ways I hadn't expected. The compensation money from the HOA settlement, combined with my consulting income and the steady revenue from the electrical easement, had allowed me to expand the farm into something Sarah would have loved. I'd established the Sustainable Agriculture and Power Education Center, offering workshops on organic farming, renewable energy, and property rights to visitors from across the region. Former enemies now lined up at my farm stand every Saturday morning, buying fresh eggs and vegetables while their children fed my chickens and learned about where food actually comes from. The most profound change, however, was personal. Standing beside Sarah's grave on the anniversary of her death, I finally felt ready to remove the wedding ring I'd worn for 3 years of grief and guilt. Moi, I protected our land like I promised, whispered to the wild flowers that grew around her headstone. But I think it's time for me to start living again, not just surviving. The ring went into a small wooden box along with her favorite photographs. Not forgotten, but no. Longer, a chain that bound me to the past. 8 months later, an unexpected letter arrived that would have made Sarah laugh until she cried. The Crystal Lake Environmental Preservation Trust, a group of environmental scientists and conservationists, offered to purchase my entire property for $4.2 million to establish a permanent nature preserve and educational facility. The irony was perfect. The land that Patricia had tried to steal through intimidation and fraud was now valuable enough to make me genuinely wealthy, not because of development potential, but because of its environmental significance and educational value. I framed the letter and hung it in my chicken coop with a handwritten caption that read, "Future options." The offer was tempting, but I wasn't ready to make any major decisions yet. For now, I was content to continue farming, consulting, and watching my former enemies become genuine neighbors. Every morning brought a line of customers to my farm stand. Many of them, the same people who'd once supported Patricia's campaign against my property rights. There was something deeply satisfying about watching smart homeowners wait patiently in line to buy real power in the form of fresh eggs and vegetables grown with my own hands. The final twist came exactly 1 year after Patricia's arrest, when Marcus Chan called with news that made me smile for the rest of the week. "Cal, you're not going to believe this, but the power company wants to offer you a full-time position as regional infrastructure consultant. Your combination of electrical engineering expertise and property law knowledge has impressed some important people. The salary offer was substantial, but more importantly, it would allow me to help other rural landowners protect their rights against corporate overreach and HOA tyranny." As I sat on my porch that evening watching the sunset over Crystal Lake and listening to my chickens settle in for the night, I reflected on the lesson this whole experience had taught me. Real power doesn't come from money, technology, or the ability to intimidate others. It comes from understanding the source, knowing your rights, and having the courage to stand up for what's right. Sometimes the quietest farmer controls more power than the loudest voice in the boardroom. And sometimes the best revenge is simply living well while watching your enemies destroy themselves. The smart homes of Emerald Heights twinkled in the distance, their LED lights finally stable and their systems running smoothly under Ruby's competent management. Tomorrow would bring another day of farming, another group of visitors to educate, and another opportunity to prove that sustainable living and community cooperation could triumph over greed and corruption. Patricia Levington had tried to steal my land and destroy my way of life, but in the end, she'd only succeeded in showing the world the difference between artificial power and the real thing. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA bullies, corporate intimidation, or neighbors who think money buys them the right to control your life? Caleb's story proves that knowledge, patience, and standing up for your rights can defeat even the most corrupt systems. You don't need wealth or connections, just courage and the truth. If this story inspired you to fight back against injustice, thank you for watching Stories. If you're a fan of epic showdowns, wild HOA dramas, and shocking small-town justice, you're in the right place. Stories brings you the most outrageous, real-life tales where power-hungry boards get exposed, justice is served, and the underdog always has the last word. Our stories are packed with suspense, humor, and twists you never see coming. Whether it's a rancher outsmarting a corrupt neighborhood association or a secret power play that flips the entire town on its head, every episode will leave you saying, "No way that just happened." We're building a community that loves bold storytelling, true underdog revenge, and dramatic moments that feel like a movie. If you enjoy rooting for the little guy and watching the bad guys get what's coming, Hit that subscribe button right now. Don't miss a single episode. New stories drop weekly, and they just keep getting crazier. Your support helps us bring even bigger and better stories to life. Like, comment, and share with friends who'd love a good dose of HOA karma. This is Stories, where the truth hits harder than the HOA fines. Subscribe now and join the rebellion.